Good evening and welcome to the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and a very special welcome to Art After Hours. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land that the gallery stands on. Now, did anybody come in over the long weekend? I'm curious. Do we have a show of hands? It's fantastic. Wasn't it amazing? It was just a huge thing. It was so special, so wondrous, so exciting. There was something like over 60 artists and performers from just about every state and territory, I think almost every region and remote area in the country, that came right here to this very special place and joined us in this fantastic celebration of Aboriginal art and culture. So it was really something quite spectacular. And of course, this celebration of Aboriginal art and culture continues for the next month or so, like 5 or 6 weeks, on Wednesday nights for Art After Hours. And of course, this celebration is in association with the Art and Soul exhibition, which is in Yiribana, the Yiribana Gallery, which is downstairs, 3 escalators down, and the exhibition is there. But we've also had this central court rehung as well, as also part of this celebration. Hetti Perkins has done a beautiful hang in this court and around in the Australian court just here. So please spend a bit of time to get to know these works. They're really quite spectacular. Now, the Art and Soul exhibition is part of a whole suite of things. It is also a TV documentary, which is going to start on the ABC tomorrow night. So I urge you all to have a look at that. It's also the launch of the book, Art and Soul, and we might do a book signing after this, or at least you can go and have a look at it in the bookstore. And there's going to be a DVD, and there's also webisodes, these things called webisodes on the internet, which is pretty exciting. And you'll see that we've got some computers sprinkled around the gallery, and you can see some of those webisodes there. And we're kicking off tonight our series of Art and Soul celebrations with a discussion with Hetti Perkins and Rachel Perkins. Hetti is the Senior Curator of Aboriginal Art here at the Gallery, and she's also the author of the documentary and the book and the curator of the exhibition. She also led the team curating the program of talks, ceremonies, performances, workshops, etc., all over the weekend. And we also have Rachel Perkins, who's a filmmaker who has directed films such as Radiance, One Night the Moon, and the award-winning Bran Nue Dae. Rachel has also made a documentary, and that was with her production company Blackfella Films, and that was shown on SBS TV. It's called First Australians, and there's a DVD and a book. And it's also an extraordinary series, an extraordinary documentary. So could you please join me in welcoming these 2 remarkable women. Hello, hi, take a seat. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Now, in that sort of very brief introduction I gave, I mean, in some ways it doesn't do justice to your extraordinary bios. So I'd like to ask, well, Rachel, you're sitting closest to me. How long have you been working in film? Sisters? No, don't answer that one. How long have you been working in filmmaking?
Okay, who can do the maths now? I started in 1988. So what's that?
22 years.
20 years, thank you. That's why I wasn't a mathematician.
Because you had a sister to do it for you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, I started in working in the film industry in 1988 in a place called Alice Springs, which a lot of you will be familiar with, of course, at an organisation called CAMA, which is acronym for the Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association.
So that's a very long career, a long and illustrious career in filmmaking.
I vividly remember those times because I was living here in Sydney at the time, and when Rachel would come to Sydney to stay, or on a bit of a trip.
Can we not tell this story?
I'm going to tell the story.
No, I don't. They don't want to hear
They
about
do.
my garbage bags, clothes.
She used to turn up at the airport,
Tell
very
you anyway.
hairy, very, very smelly, the great unwashed that she was, with
Thanks
and
for
we'd
that. It's
stand there at the carousel waiting for her bags to come off, which usually consisted of a garbage bag that had spewed its contents all over the carousel, or on a good day it was a milk crate. So there you go. That's a great start. And I'd be like, yes, my sister, I'll just be in the car park. You know. Sorry about that, Rach.
What
Yes.
are sisters for?
Yes.
Okay, well, Hetti, how long have you been curating in that case?
Oh, okay. Well,
long's
now
your
it might be
career?
time for Rachel to do the maths for me. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it was in, 1987. Yeah, I think
23 years.
23 years ago. What's 22 plus 1?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's popping. And that was at the Aboriginal Artists Gallery, it was called, in Sydney, at Kent Street, behind St Andrew's House there. And it was one of the galleries of the government marketing agency for Aboriginal arts and crafts at the time, that sort of wound up in, I think it was in 1990, not due to me working there. Of course, by the time that the 1990s rolled around, you didn't need a government agency to market Aboriginal art anymore. It was pretty much well on its way. So started off there.
And you've been here at the gallery for...
It's 23, I don't know. My first show I did was in 1990, and that was, it actually showed here, in 1991. It was the Aboriginal Women's Exhibition. It was just in the Project Gallery here. And it was, and then I was working as a part-time curator, as well as working at Bumali Aboriginal Artists Cooperative, also here in Sydney. And as many of you will know, 2 part-time jobs really means 2 full-time jobs. And I had I had my son then and another one on the way, so I had to give something up, and I gave up working at the art gallery, believe it or not, so that I could work at Bumali, because there were a lot of artists, Koori artists living in Sydney coming through, and I really wanted to work with artists at that very sort of, like grassroots sort of stage, helping artists, quite a few of whom, Michael Riley, for instance, Harry Wedge, Brenda Croft, artists like that, come through the ranks and actually get their work into places like the art gallery.
Yeah, the history of Bumali is quite extraordinary. It's an amazing thing. Now, often the children of high-achieving and high-profile parents go the other way, and they lead very quiet lives. And yet, both of you have excelled in your own fields, and in these very extraordinary ways. And it just seems to be growing and growing. What sort of legacy did your father, Charlie Perkins, leave you, do you think, that has given you this impetus?
Well, I think he demonstrated in his own life that individuals could create change and influence their societies, around them and their communities for the better. And so we had a very clear example of how one could do that and the benefits that flowed from that. So I think he gave us a sense of purpose. And, he suffered from a kidney transplant for many years. And so, he survived with a kidney transplant for many years. And so he, at a very early age, had sort of been given the gift of life. So he appreciated the very short time that a life can be, and always encouraged us to, use our lives to the fullest and make the most of any opportunities. And I don't know whether that has resonance for you, but I think, that combination of seeing social change happen and the conviction that you shouldn't waste the time you have on the planet combine to inspire us to do positive things and to not take no for an answer when we went out to try and achieve our goals of whether it be putting on exhibitions and doing extraordinary books or making films to communicate to wide audiences. Just felt like that we had the potential to do those things, I suppose.
I think that's true, and certainly we're encouraged by both Mum and Dad to sort of realise our ambitions. But also I think with Dad, he'd say, I remember once being terrified at having to give a lecture or something, and And he said, you know, I'm terrified every time I have to get up and speak or do a talk. You know, nerves are just something that he'd never, you know, you just don't really get used to it. And he said, but, you know, what you just have to realise is if you get a chance to speak for your people, you know, you do it. You get up and you do it and you do a good job. It's not about you, you know, just get on with it. And so I think that's sort of a really good thing, because you sort of feel like it's not, you know, it's not, I mean, obviously we're sitting here now, but it's not sort of, it's about speaking for your people or just speaking about what you think is right rather than sort of being some leader type person.
Now, I think I've read about him that he certainly valued his family enormously, and he would have considered his 3 children as 3 of his greatest achievements. And you may be a little too close for this question, but I was wondering if what you think might be his greatest achievements in terms of the wider world. I don't know who's going to want to respond to this first, but and you, as I say, you might be too close, but given that you clearly know his life so well, and you know the things that he went through, and the achievements that he succeeded in.
Yeah, I mean, he was at the forefront of the indigenous political advancement movement from the 60s through till 2000, so it was 40 years. And in that time, you know, we saw the growth of thousands of Indigenous organisations across the country, you know, a movement of Indigenous people into the education sector, you know, I mean, in extraordinary changes that he was part of, the establishment of the Indigenous department within the Commonwealth Government, you know, many broad, sweeping changes that have made differences to Indigenous people in so many ways. But, you know, so it's hard to think about a single aspect. But I think he was, for a long time, he was the social conscience of Australia in Indigenous affairs, and was a reminder for Indigenous, you know, for all Australians to remember their past and their history. And I mean, something that I think one of the personal ambitions that I don't think was realised in his lifetime, but that he very strongly believed in, was that Indigenous culture should be, and history should be, seen by all Australians as part of their own identity. And he felt that all this Indigenous culture that you see glimpses of around on these walls had such an extraordinary heritage and richness to offer the country, and to offer everyday Australians as part of their own identity. And he felt it was wasted, and he used to call it, you know, it's like throwing strawberries to pigs, he said. You know, it's just, there's such a heritage here and it's not appreciated, but he had an ambition that one day all Australians would accept it as part of their own identity. And I think we're seeing that change just now. I think, you know, the education system is changing to embrace Indigenous history, Indigenous arts, Indigenous culture, and I think we'll see a new generation of Australians, similar to what we've seen in New Zealand to some degree, take on part of the Indigenous heritage as their heritage. So I think that's one of the ideals that he expressed to me, that certainly I've tried to pursue in my work, in terms of my filmmaking work, is to give back to Australians a sense of their own history, you know, particularly Indigenous history as part of their heritage.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is terrific. I think there was, you know, several landmark sort of events, I guess, in his life that he would have, in his autobiography, in fact, he said, you know, the Freedom Ride was something for him that was a critical, you know, turning point, as well as, of course, being scouted to play for Manchester United, which he finally didn't take up. Going to university, of course, was something for him, and meeting Ted Noffs, that, you know, wonderful Australian, was a real... you know, he felt that was a really significant turning point in his life, as well as being, you know, the longest surviving kidney transplant recipient, I think, in the world by the time he passed away. And I think he was, you know, the R word, the retirement word, was not something we were allowed to say around the house, and I think that he was pretty happy that he'd kept up the good fight right up until the end. Of course, with the Sydney Olympics, he was still being quite outspoken even at that point in his life. So And seeing grandkids. He was pretty happy to see a couple of grandkids, and you know, so there was a whole lot of, as you said, family was very, very important. And
I think he was quite disappointed though, towards the end of his life, because it was, the rights movement had been wound back as he saw it. So there were things that he didn't get to see in his lifetime, like the treaty, that got pushed off the table in favour of reconciliation and national land rights and other things that he hoped to have achieved within his lifetime that he didn't get to see. So he was, to his dying day, he was, fighting and hoping to realise these aims that he didn't feel like Australia had gotten to. He wasn't one to sort of rest on, oh, okay, the job is done,
the project continues.
Yeah, there was always a horizon to sort of
strive towards.
Yes, well, he was certainly very inspirational and had an enormous effect on many, many people's lives. And he had a very interesting background himself. But of course, your family heritage is Aranda and Kalkadoon, and that's from Central Australia. Yeah.
Yes, the Aranda is from Central Australia, and that's through his mother, and through his father was the Kalkadoon blood, which is from Mount Isa people. Yep.
And have you spent much time out there? And you've got relatives and...
We have about 40,000 relatives in Alice Springs, and that's just the first cousins. So, yeah, we really follow our grandmother's line more strongly through Alice Springs than... because he didn't really know his father. He only met him once, I think, didn't he? So he didn't really... It was later in life that he connected with the Kalkadoon side more, but really, his heart was in Alice Springs, and that's where, we consider our home country to be, east of Alice Springs. I think is where our affiliation lies more strongly.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of family in Alice Springs.
Getting back to your work, Rachel, in your documentary, The First Australians, which it was an amazing history that you presented to the world, and certainly many people were very surprised by this history. It was something that they hadn't really come across before. What were some of the the great discoveries or uncoveries, perhaps, or the research gems that you came across in that documentary research?
Well, we drew from historians' work because, to research just one part of the history takes, a historian, 10 years. So we really relied on others' work. But for me, I thought I knew a lot about Indigenous affairs and Indigenous history growing up in our family, and the revelation for me was actually the most surprising thing was how little I knew. And I got very embarrassed about how little I knew, and then quite impassioned to share what I discovered with, my countrymen and other Australians. And I think, for me, so that was the big surprise. And then secondary to that, I think, because we were making a television series, we had to be guided. It's a visual medium, so we had to, find visuals to tell the story. And so the photographic and pictorial record for me was a revelation, and discovering the people behind these photographs was extraordinary. I mean, the Victorian photo collections that begin in the 1860s, that are predominantly of Indigenous Australians, some of the first photos taken there, that we know those people like William Barak, who I was talking with earlier, to Jonathan Jones, who works here. The photographic record of him and his extraordinary life is one of the great Australian tragedies. And I just found this image of a man in what's called IATSIS, which is the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies in Canberra, has the biggest collection of Indigenous materials in the world on Australian Indigenous people. And I just kept finding these photos of this extraordinary looking man. I was like, who is this man? And I discovered he was William Barak, and then I discovered his history, which had been written by an extraordinary historian, Diane Barwick. And so things like that, how people appeared and came out of the records towards us, and how we sort of woke them from the dead in the way, pieced together their lives from scraps of letters and little bits of music recording, and small newspaper articles and reconstructed these extraordinary lives was a really wonderful experience.
I think it was in watching that amazing documentary, it was really interesting to see how intertwined a lot of these narratives were. We sort of have in history, the Australian history that we'd been given previously, you tend to sort of see Aboriginal cultures somehow being separated out or just not there. We hear about Captain Cook and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, that was something that was brought home to me very strongly, that, Indigenous people were performing theatre at the gold rush. They were looking after children. They were, at the foundation of Melbourne. They were there. They took, they searched for convicts and bushrangers in Tasmania. They were just absolutely woven into, the European experience of this country. And in a way, contemporary history has sort of taken them out. And our challenge now is to put them back into the picture. But yes, they've been there. I mean, Bennelong is a great example, who was sleeping at Government House and was eating at Governor Phillip's table in the first 3 years of the settlement. And so these histories, our history is inexorably intertwined. And, it's just something that we haven't been exposed to, but is now being reintroduced back to us.
Rachel opened an exhibition just last week or so at the Mitchell Library, which I'd urge you all to go and have a look at. What's it called again?
It's called Mari Nawi, which means big canoe in the local Gadigal language, and it's about Indigenous men who are mariners who, accompanied Flinders around Australia when he circumnavigated the continent and worked as sealers. And, the first Australian, these men were, to travel to Canada and the United States, and they met the, King Kamehameha, who was the native Hawaiian empire builder of Hawaii. They stayed with him and they saw these extraordinary experiences. They were really our first Australian explorers, if you like, and they saw the world. So this exhibition documents these Aboriginal men and their journeys. It's on at the State Library now. It's excellent.
It is excellent. You really must go and see it. It's extraordinary. Hetti, you know all these artists very well because they're in your collection, this collection that you've built here at the Art Gallery. And you, of course, know these artists' practice like the back of your hands. Did you discover anything in your research and in the actual process of filming this documentary? Was there something that was a major revelation to you?
I think it's following the policy of only asking questions when you know what the answer is going to be was one of the guiding principles of it. But I find that every time I go to a place that I know even reasonably well, like Kurikura or Maningrida or various remote area communities, or even Richard Bell's studio in Brisbane, I sort of learn something new every time, and I think that it's great because there's a similar thing with my take on Indigenous art. It's just potential for infinite renewal is sort of incredible, and every time I sort of see, every time I look at Mike O'Reilly's Cloud series, I see something different. I think something different. It just continues to speak to me. And so I guess I expected to be surprised, but there were a couple of things like having the sauna. Gulumbu Yunupingu, who of course was here on the weekend, decided that I would have a bush sauna, which is part of her role as a healer. She's an incredible healer, and she's done some sort of miraculous healings of people close to her. And so she decided I would do that, and she does this as part of the Gama Festival every year up in Yirrkala. And so that was quite a new experience for me. It's basically a bed of hot coals and get wrapped up in paper bark and sort of get cooked on the hot coals for a while. Of course, I was terrified a spider was going to run out. I'm terrified of spiders. But Gulumbu assured me she'd given the paper bark a good shake before she wrapped me up in it.
They'd probably all be burned to death anyway.
Either that or run for cover across my face. So that was sort of I did approach, I have to say, the bed of coals with some trepidation, and only got a minor burn as a memento.
And did you feel better afterwards?
I did. It was actually quite extraordinary. Warwick teased me a bit. He called me a dolmatis. And it was very hard to hold a straight face. And thankfully, Gulumbu was controlling the filming, so as much as Warwick, I'm sure, would have loved to catch me capering across to the ground in my horrible sarong, she wouldn't allow that, so that was very good. That was a relief. Mm-hmm. But seriously though, it was really quite extraordinary because, there's a whole process of massaging and then leaves that have been steeped in water and bark, and there's all this sort of bush medicine that comes into the whole experience as well, while you're basically being steamed on these coals. But it was, as I was lying there, I was thinking that it's a bit like, because of her work, you can see on the bark paintings on my left here, your right, the first one is by Gulumbu, and she paints these wonderful starry universes. Garak, the universe, is her main theme. And she paints that because she says it's not a sacred story. It's not owned by any one particular clan group in Yirrkala. It's a story for everyone, and that's why she paints it, because she conveys this message of the our common humanity, that we're all people. We all share the planet, the universe, and so it's a wonderful sort of message of peace and unity. And I think that being in this kind of sauna thing, it was almost like being part of, entering that kind of universe, this sense of spiritual sort of wellness and being sort of drawn into this world that Gulumbu creates. So certainly that was some, I don't even have kind of standard saunas here in Sydney, so having a bush one was a new experience. Sheona, yes?
Well, I don't think you could ever go and do anything else.
No, that's right.
Just a standard sauna seems very dull by comparison.
It does.
Now, the themes of your exhibition are extraordinary, and they're beautifully resonant. They do resonate with one another, but they're also distinct as well. Can you take us through those themes very briefly? I know actually you could probably write a PhD thesis on them, but just just off the cuff like that. How about just the themes of your exhibition?
Sure. Well, there are the three themes: home and away, dreams and nightmares, bitter and sweet, and I think any of the artists really could fit into any of the themes, but one of the reasons why it is thematic is to look at the work of our artists without sort of looking at it by region or by chronology. So sort of looking at what connects artists, like ideas, imagination, or themes that are in their work. And so it's trying to sort of see what the connections are. It's coming back a bit to what Rachel was saying, the connections, the history that we share, but we're not always made aware of. So it's some of the connections the artist might have that aren't necessarily obvious. So for instance, in the first episode, Destiny Deacon, shares the episode with some artists from Papunya-Toola, for instance. So home and away is about, what does home mean for us, for our people today, and what does being away mean? So, for instance, someone like Ricky Maynard, he's taking photographs not only in his own country, which is Tasmania. He lives on Flinders Island, but also taking photographs of the Wick Elders from Arakoon in far north Queensland, or artists that have been, or inmates in prisons, and what it's like for them to be away from home, dispossession, incarceration. And then, thinking about people, say, like Judy Watson, who lives in Brisbane, but her country is Wanyulands in Western Queensland, actually close neighbours to Kalkadoon mob. So that's, home and away, what that's sort of about. And then Dreams and Nightmares looks at the idea of dreamings, which, of course, is a catchphrase of many people's understanding of Aboriginal art these days. Everything is a dreaming or has a dreaming. And I remember when I was working at the Aboriginal Artists Gallery in the late 80s, people would come in wanting a dreaming for their bedroom and looking for something to match the doona cover. So that was sort of the extent of the engagement. So we just teased that idea out a bit. And look at, that there's as many language groups as there are different words for dreaming. And of course, it's a way of trying to grasp the spirituality of many of the artists' work. But also that, many artists, of course, not only Aboriginal artists, are inspired by the world of dreams, imagination, and so on. Someone like Harry Wedge, for instance, paints what he dreams about, or what he sees on a current affair. So it can be as sort of, as, the sacred and the profane, if you like. And then the nightmare is, there's a flip side to everything, and it could be the nightmare of colonisation, the nightmare of dispossession, The Nightmare of the Stolen Generations, which Brenda L. Croft, interrogates in her work, or The Nightmare of Cyclone Tracy, and how that gave rise to the wonderful Gurgurl ceremony, which was performed here on the weekend, and of course the Kimberley Contemporary Art Movement. And then very quickly moving on to Bitter and Sweet. It's kind of a wrap-up sort of episode, I guess, and in that we look at artists like Michael Riley, for instance, who make these wonderfully beautiful works, such as Cloud, but they can refer to subjects that are quite bitter, so colonisation, the role of missionaries in Aboriginal society, pastoralism, effect on the landscape, and so on. Or the use of humour, as in someone like Richard Bell, that kind of wraps his political message often in this sort of cotton wool of humour, the scalpel wrapped in cotton wool, or someone like Gulumbu, remembering. So bittersweet could be nostalgia, like Gulumbu remembering she's inspired by the stars, but she also remembers her father at dawn every morning would sing the stars, and that's what she would wake up to every morning, and that's such a beautiful thing to imagine. Someone's, being woken up to your father singing to the stars in the heavens. So, yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Right. It's fantastic. You all must go down and have another look afterwards at the exhibition to see how that really gels with such a beautiful description. Now, just because, no one's going to let either of you rest, I was just wondering, is there anything that you can tell us that you've got cooking in the pipeline about future projects?
We're trying to create an indigenous festival here at the gallery.
How did I know?
Because last weekend was so successful. It was packed here with people. There were kids and adults running around. There was so much activities. It was really great. It'd come alive with art. It was great. And I run a film festival down the road at the Opera House. So we're trying to get them to happen together. And I think Edmund's agreed to do it if he's here.
Safely out of the building, we can... Yes.
And so he's agreed to do it. So we're hoping, because it's the only city... I mean, can you believe it? We're in Sydney and we do not have an Indigenous festival. I mean, how is that possible? So we're going to bring these two fabulous institutions together in their collective resources. So that's what we're cooking up this afternoon. But so stay tuned for that next year. But I'm doing a mini-series for SBS on the life of Eddie Mabo and his extraordinary native title case, and a movie about William Dawes, who was a Marine on the First Fleet, and Petchagarang, one of his principal informants, who was a Cumragull young woman who lived on the North Shore and came and visited him in his observatory between 1788 and 1791, and they taught each other their language, and there's a possibility that they might have fallen in love. So it's the contemporary Australian love story. So that's what I'm working on.
So, Hetti, have you had a chance to think past this afternoon yet?
No. Yes, I'm working on
the new
getting
festival
through tomorrow. And the new festival, yes. No, I think the new festival is a very good idea, and something that would be terrific to present in Sydney, because as Rachel was saying, did you say it? Yes. There isn't one in Sydney. We have a sort of a music festival, the Yarbin Festival, which is on Survival Day, or Australia Day as it's also known every year. And then there's the Garma Festival, but there's no, really big festival celebrating Indigenous arts and culture, performing arts, visual arts and so on. I think would be a fabulous thing to have once a year.
Who agrees about that?
Okay, done.
Yes. Does anyone disagree? There.
No.
Unanimous.
Unanimous. It is a democracy we live in. I'll tell Edmund. And apart from that, there's a couple of exhibitions that I'd like to do here that look at, actually, speaking of Gulumbu, the night sky, the fact we often associate Aboriginal art with more earth-based kind of practices. So we're sort of thinking about exploring the wonderful, the heavens and the incredible artistic responses, to that sort of realm. But that's baby stages.
Sounds fantastic, and I love the idea of this festival. I think we're all very excited about that one, and we're all lining up to come along.
Should send a petition around now. We
should sign it. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. That's a fascinating and very, very quick romp through both of your amazing projects and a little bit about your careers and background. It was just wonderful that you could be here and share this with us tonight. So could you all please join me in thanking Hetti and Rachel Perkins.
Thanks for coming.